Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns, those anti-federalists. What is it? Yep, they got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host, and wow, what an interesting week we've had again. And for me, I have to say thank you very much to Lake County Liberty Coalition. Lake County Liberty Coalition in Lake County, Ohio. What a great bunch of folks that had their first meeting in almost a year, physical meeting. And they had a wonderful attendance. It was just amazing to see all of the folks there. And I had the privilege and honor of speaking at that group in attendance. And to open their new year of meetings was so appropriate because what this program is about is the Lesser Magistrate Part 2. Part 1 was actually on Wednesday night, not last night, it was Wednesday night. So I'm getting my timing off a little bit here, but you know how that goes. So Wednesday night is when we met at a very delightful couple's home, and they had the capacity to have a large number of people gather, and we did. And we did. We did as citizens that resist tyranny. We did as citizens who understand the truths and principles laid out from our founding fathers for how we should act in the senses when tyranny is lying to us. And we look at that from the programming that I will continuously for those in Ohio. And I suggest that you folks throughout the rest of the land that are hearing this program to learn how to discern fact and truth numerically around the Chi-Com flu issue is Dr. Douglas Frank on YouTube. That's Douglas G. Frank. I think it's Dr. Douglas G. Frank on YouTube. He has not only followed the numbers, looking at statistically how to discern, especially in Ohio, what the truth is from the statistics, but then he has just a great program after every press conference of our governor that tries to manipulate that data and truth to keep his insanity going. Now, I want to segue a moment before we dive into this whole idea of the Lesser Magistrate Part 2. And just to bring it back from last week's program momentarily, and the idea that there's billions of dollars involved. And as we're seeing, there's now $1.9 trillion involved in what is going on with the Chi-Com flu. And when you start really getting into it, and I know everybody doesn't have the time, and it's irrational to have the time, but what is important to understand as we go into this part 2 is that our representatives in the national level are not representing. They're not representing we, the people. They're representing the special interest. They're representing the moneyed interest. They are representing the medical interest, the bio company interest, all of those other interests, and not ours. So, you know, there it is. The anti-federalists did get it right, as they said that the federal government would eventually take and get into every one of our interests. That means, as I like saying, ladies into your boudoir and gentlemen into your wine cellars, because they want the control, and they want to, as many other, well, I can't say many other, but as the regular pundits out there all flap their lips in the wind, declaring all of the evils, but never proposing mechanisms to overcome them. Whereas here on this program, we make every effort to take and find that way through those mirrors of history so that you can execute on that which is important for self governance and within our local governments in particular. So, when we look at all of the billions of dollars that are out there that are pouring into all of the various states, right down to your local school district, it becomes extremely critical that we as citizens learn how to push back against that, because the infringements, as we are now seeing from this House legislation on H.R. 1, this Equality Act, which is not anything about equality, but will be about what we're going to discuss here in this part 2 on the lesser magistrate, is a total, fundamental, immoral attack on Christianity. Now, I will declare to you simply, fundamentally, truthfully, is that attack on the conscience, the good moral conscience of the people of the colonies, on Christianity in the colonies, is exactly one of the major flames that set off the American Revolution. Yeah, definitely was. And we're going to get to that here in a few minutes, especially in the second segment. But let me kind of recapture for you Wednesday night at the Lake County Liberty Coalition. It was just a great night to talk about the history of the lesser magistrate, to talk about briefly what happened at Magdeburg historically that set that hard point for the Reformation to be able to continue when Charles V was attacking and pushing all of the various Protestants that were out there back into that which they left from the Catholic Church. And the fact that Magdeburg became that center focal point, especially for Lutherans, to stand up and say, no, you just can't do that. You cannot impose a violation of conscience on us, and we're willing to fight and die for it. Now, I'm going to set the framework here, and just to let you know, if you haven't looked at the notes and you haven't received the promo, the weekly newsletter, it's all up here over my shoulder for those that are watching at samueladamsreturns.net. You need to go there and look at all of the references, because in that list of references is the PDF of the presentation from Wednesday night. And in that PDF has a lot of links that are historically are the links that bring all of this truth of the lesser magistrates to bear. But secondly, in there are all of the truths of which we're going to talk about today, which means what can we do as a population, as individuals, as groups of individuals, if the lesser magistrates are on the side of the enemy. And that's what happened, is that a lot of the lesser magistrates during the foundational period, and even some of the churches during the foundational period, were on the side of the governors and on the side of the king, which was the side against religious liberty and against the free commerce of the people and against the liberties of the people in America. So that is what we're going to jump into when we get into segments 2 and 3. But I wanted to just bring that Magdeburg was that focal point that allowed then the Reformation to move forward. And then as it propagated and became more solidified, especially in England and Scotland, with the Scottish portion of that Reformation, and Rutherford, Knox, and a number of the others that I've talked about often, and then how that matured there into standing up for the liberties off the continent and the liberties that were there in England and Scotland, as that whole, I mean, that was a real ruckus there. It became interesting to understand then what would happen in America. And as it came to fruition in the 1600s, so the 1500s, that's not far away. And then what was going on in America. And then in America, those of the Reformation minded pastors and churches and that watching the continued persecution of Protestants in the continent, on the continent of Europe, and in particular, the French Huguenots and all that was happening with them and the persecution and the killing of Protestant people, America took a really interesting perspective of all of that. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in these last segments. But to finish up, that in the slide presentation from Wednesday night, and as you go and you can download that, it's a downloadable PDF that I'm making available if you want to download it. In that, you will see that there's some good work that identifies 4 DEFCON levels, if you will. And as I'm speaking and as you're watching this on YouTube, or you can see that I'm putting up that slide of those 4 DEFCON levels that show what do we have to do to move through resistance, not just for the lesser magistrates, but then what do we have to pay attention to for you and I? When is it that we look at what is going on in our local government, in our state government, and worse, in our national government, and say, time out? And if we cannot get those that we've elected to office, and if we cannot get the bureaucrats to come around, well, what can you do about it? Well, one of the opportunities that you have, and I think the video is going to be up on Lobbyists for Citizens, is the short clip of Wednesday night and the presentation, as well as part of the solution sets. It's critical to understand that there are groups, and not just the Tea Party groups, but there's really active groups. And Ohio is doing a fabulous job of developing coalitions, again, across many of the groups. And the first aspect of the coalition is to take on the governor and the insanity, the evil, the restrictions of the mask mandates and all the other mandates, when in fact the numbers, the statistics show there's nothing happening here in Ohio except the bad flu. And in fact, the numbers are well under that, which even the CDC says is a pandemic. So we have to stop the governor and all of the different health departments from the evil that they're perpetrating on the people and using, and then we'll talk about this a little bit in the next segment, using businesses to impose tyranny. That's not supposed to happen here in America. And that definitely isn't supposed to happen in Ohio, nor any state in general. So the point is that if we're taking and pressing on the lesser magistrates to do their job and supporting them when they do the right things and expecting the right things, well, that's what Samuel Adams did. He was elected to office, and he became known as the father of the American Revolution. And the Anti-Federalists surely said, you know what? We get it right because the other guys got it wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. This is that second segment. And thank you to Liberty Works Radio Network for taking and having us on 3 different time slots on Saturday. And we really appreciate that. And to show that appreciation, I am asking you to take and go find that donate button and donate, participate. And I'm not telling you Liberty Works Radio Network to do that. Come on, folks. I'm asking you to do that. Check it all out. Check out the programming and see what's going on. So as I closed out the last segment, I made the comment that the anti-federalists, Sam Adams and the rest of them, were saying, we got it right and the rest of y'all got it wrong. Well, they didn't say y'all because that wasn't part of the lingo and dialect of the day. But to that point is that the rest of the Federalists under the Constitution of 87, the anti-federalists clearly were articulating that the potentials of an overreaching federal government would be upon us. So that is why they mandated in conventions within the states that there would be amendments that would protect the rights of the individuals and the states. Well, that was supposed to have been also the job of the Senate, but we're not going to get into the 17th Amendment. But we do have a 10th Amendment that we need to exercise very, very clearly. But as we know, that's become convoluted because of all of the various federal decisions, the federal court, Supreme Court, and what has happened over the last number of decades that have taken and made the ability of states to fight the federal government more and more difficult and tell them to get out of our state. Well, that's up to our locally elected. Our locally elected should be telling the federal government, no, we don't want that money that belongs to the other people in the United States. We don't want that money that you're printing, fiat money, nor do we want what you're taking loans from the likes of China and the likes of all these other entities and putting the burden for those on our children. Our local elected don't think that way. They think, oh boy, look at that. There's more federal money that we can get and bring in. Governor DeWine is all about that. The universities are all about that. The school districts, the local school districts are all about that. So when we look at what happened during our founding era, and this is where we're now going to get into part 2 of the Lesser Magistrates, is that I want to go back and I want in the references to make sure that you go to this work by a very interesting young lady who was, I believe, doing her doctoral thesis and getting her doctoral work, is an article that was done in 2018 that she put in there on Whose Rebellion? Reformed Resistance in America, Part 2. And it's by Sarah Morgan Smith. This is the foundation for the conversation because she did a lot of great homework. So I didn't have to do all the research. She did it, for us. And I want to present her work to you so that you can understand, especially Christians, understand that simply, no different than during the American Revolution, there's a lot of pastors out there that are in violation of fundamental truth, fundamental biblical truth, because of their no resistance, their pacifism, their ideas that you just have to accept everything because their misinterpretation of Romans 13 and Peter and all the different scriptures that they quote this. Oh no, we're supposed to obey everything. Well, we're not supposed to obey evil. We're not supposed to. Oh, but persecution is good for the church. If I haven't said it before, which I know I have in many other programs, I'm going to let you in on a secret here. You see, the whole idea of the foundation of constitutionalism in America wasn't just for economy and all of that. It was for the fact of religious liberty, which we're going to get into a bit, and the reality that government has no right to interfere with your conscience and to destroy Christianity and your personal freedoms and liberties that are God given as noted in the Declaration of Independence. So, in the presentation from Wednesday night, I do talk about what happened during the first American Revolution in, what was that, 1689? Or was it, yeah, 1689. And wow, that wasn't too far off from, what was happening then 100 years later, less than 100 years, 80 years, something like that. So you have to take into consideration all that was happening then and how everything was directed from the pulpit. Now, there were some pastors that were going, "Oh no, whoa, 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 what just happened here in Boston? And how do we look at that?" But what was happening was that Governor Andros was absolutely tyrannical. And I'd say that Governor Andros and Governor DeWine and all of the other Democrat governors that are out there are all in the same boat. And that they are tyrants and they're dictatorial. And what they're doing is instituting despotism and tyranny. But I have to qualify it. What I have to qualify is that we do not have a great awakening in the churches happening here in America. We do not have that depth of understanding in the pulpits of the truths that came forward during that period in the 16 and 1700s in America to be able to take and know what our liberties are. So not only are the pulpits stupid, I'm sorry, pastors, you're stupid in many ways. There's a lot of them. I mean, there's a lot that aren't. I mean, I mentioned that last time that we have, a number of pastors out there that I know that are on the correct page and are talking about standing up and how do we resist tyranny. But the majority, they don't. And therefore, they're sitting there going, no, we got to let this all play out, or they're on that page I talked about in the last segment is, oh, you know what? Persecution is good for the church. No, I'm sorry, not in our constitutional republic. Never supposed to happen. Not on this soil, not in this nation. So, moving on, in this article here that it was written by this young lady, what was going on is that even here in America, they're trying to really pay attention to what was going on in the persecution of the Huguenots and to actively address that. Uh, Cotton Mather, he wrote and as well as he preached in 1725 a sermon, and here is the English instead of the French in it, is A Loud Voice from Heaven to France. And it's a pamphlet that he wanted to get into the French churches, into the hands. And what he was urging is that the persecuted Protestants in France to consider themselves individually as agents of divine justice against their oppressors. And what that means in this tract was that It was a call for individuals to take it upon themselves to initiate a revolutionary action through which God might liberate his people from their popish persecutors. And Mather was kind of unclear on a number of things, but you have to understand a decade earlier, he was highly involved. He was helped lead that revolution in New England to overthrow the dominion. Get it? Remember, I talked about that last week and a couple weeks ago. Dominion of New England in 1689. 1689. So as we were making that move to liberty and freedom, we're just going to be able to cover the beginning of this article. But the fact is that congregational ministers across New England and even South, took up a position that the likes of Calvin actually changed his thinking towards the end of his life, that if you can't find a lesser magistrate to stand up, the unanimity of the citizens coming together to stand against tyranny, that was something acceptable. It was acceptable in a manner of not to do it just to cause insurrection. It was acceptable in the manner that it would be for the total liberties of the people, their God-given liberties, and the preservation of Christianity. The two have to be hand in hand in respect, kind of rendering this down quite a bit. So what we have here is that when you look at how Cotton Mather preached, how the likes of Jonathan Todd preached in an election day sermon, as I've noted before, we don't have those any longer. There's no such thing as a pastor going before those that were elected to give them a word from God or to chastise them from the word of God to act in an appropriate manner for governing. In that, the doctrine of obedience and subjection to the magistrate had caused a lot of issues, and that there was there where the people were looked at and going, what do you mean not to make any resistance to bad leadership? So it was the whole point that would come down to, and as I've said, and I put in the last week, is it comes down to we have to, for self-defense, for the laws of self-defense, we have to obey God before we obey man. So what we're seeing now from a modern implication, as we're just closing up this last minute or so in this segment, is that we have all these various impositions by our elected magistrates, even down into the local level, in some of the cities and counties where they're making mandatory determinations where they'll fine people for not wearing a mask. That's against your personal liberties. So those people are wrong. They are absolutely wrong, and they deserve to be resisted in an appropriate manner. And that's why there's a number of groups in Ohio that others can contact me, and I'll give you a highlight on what's going on with that. May talk about it a little bit in the next segment. But the fact of the matter is that these arbitrary, tyrannical and arbitrary actions and powers must be resisted. And that is a biblically solid to do. And we're going to carry on with that in the third segment. We'll talk about Jonathan Mayhew and what he preached in a discourse concerning unlimited submission and non-resistance to a higher power. So John Adams wrote in that, and this is active for today, is that the principles and feelings which produced the revolution should study Dr. Mayhew's sermon. So we'll take that up probably next week in a continuation. I may have a guest next week. I'm trying to work on that. But the fact of the matter is, philosophically, it is our Christian duty to actively resist tyrannical government and the question, who can properly resist tyrants? Sam Adams knew the answer to that. The Anti Federalists knew the answer to that. And you're going to know a little bit more about that as we come back into the next segment of this programming. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti Federalists got it right. What I would like all of you to do as we welcome back all of our friends there in Lima, Ohio, with what is that? Come on, folks. The Screaming Eagles down there. Yep. I am looking at, oh, wait a minute. Where'd you go? Soaring Eagle Radio. How about that? Hey, get on it there with Dr. Mike. You know what? He's changing up some things. Check out what's going on with him and all you folks there on Soaring Eagle Radio. Good place to be. And I'm thankful to be there as well. And with that, what I would like you to do is, if you're watching this on YouTube, is to take and do what everybody else asks people on YouTube to do, is go ahead and like the program, subscribe to the program. And, I think it's what, that little bell thing for the notifications. So it's there. Join the channel. And I appreciate it if you do. Or go to what's up over my left shoulder is samueladamsreturns.net, and you can find all the archives of the programming there. But more importantly, you can find all the references for the programming there and the podcast version of this as well. So there's a lot of places you can get a lot of information from Samuel Adams Returns at samueladamsreturns.net. We have all the links there to the podcast, right there to YouTube, and all the references for the program, which there are a ton of. And in particular for this program, if you download the PDF for the program on the presentation from Wednesday night, it is just packed. 3 slides worth of information packed in references. And we're going through one of those references right now. The reference is none other than Whose Rebellion? Reformed Resistance Theory in America, Part 2, and by Ms. Smith. And it is and she may be married because she has 2 last names, but go to the reference and you can figure that out. Otherwise, I'll get lost in where I am here. So what we're looking at from the last segment was that we brought it to the perspective that when you can't find those lesser magistrates to stand up against the tyranny and that, the reformers themselves, and especially then the pastors in America, they looked around and went, you know what? The people have a right to stand up against the tyranny of those they even elected to office or those that were appointed over them. So let's dissect that in our modern time for just a moment, because I think if we don't have the guest that I'm trying to get on next week, I will dissect Dr. Mayhew's sermon. And that will be a sermon that I put up this week in the sermons of the foundation in that tab on the website, because I think it's critical that we look at that. As John Adams said, that if you want to understand the revolution, you need to study Dr. Mayhew's sermon. So I guess that's a good thing for us to do. So let's dissect Ohio a little bit in particular. At the national level, right now, we have evil personified. So let me take a couple minutes on that. Evil personified. The evil, regardless of cheating to get into office, stealing the election, whatever your point of view is on that, does not matter. But what you have are ungodly people pushing ungodly, communist, tyrannical, theft of your property, your money, your person, and potentially your lives being pushed at the national level. And what we have is complacent, or worse, as in the case of Ohio and other states as well, we have governors that are co conspirators in that evil. Now, in Ohio, we have a very confused governor in particular, in that he says one thing out of the one side of his mouth, that he is a conservative Republican and that he is just doing, what is right for the people. But as you'll see in the one slide on the program, and I want to read this to you real quick on a trader, I think you'll find it very intriguing. Is let me bring that up, and I'm going to put this up. It should be in front of you for those that are watching YouTube, and that this is up here. And just the first quoted a day that I did is that, for the traitor appears not a traitor. He speaks in accents familiar to his victims, and he wears their face and their arguments. Kind of sounds like Governor DeWine. He wears the face. Oh, I'm a conservative. I'm a good guy. And he uses the arguments, well, I'm here to blah, 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 blah. But he appeals to the baseness that lies deep in the hearts of all men. He rots the soul of a nation. Well, that's O'Biden and that crew. They're so evil. That applies to them. But here in the state of Ohio, and take it into your local county or into your other cities like Cuyahoga County, Summit County, this fits for them, as well as into the city of Cleveland and Columbus and some of the other cities. He rots the soul of a nation. He works secretly and unknown in the night to undermine the pillars of the city. Boy, I'll tell you, whew. He infects the body politic so that it can no longer resist. The Republican Party has done nothing. Jane Timken did nothing when she was in there as the state chair of the Republican Party to thwart the evils, the despotism, the tyranny of Governor DeWine, and now she wants to run for Senate? Come on, give me a break. Or how, anyway. So here it continues. A murderer is less to fear. The traitor is the plague. So you've been reading that along as I've been filling in the blanks. Of course, there are no blanks in the sentence, but this was written by Cicero. So with that, it's important to understand that that's what we're dealing with, is that we have the snakes in the grass that are there, and that they are the traitors to the good cause of this nation. And we have that also within the churches. The churches are full of traitors also. And a lot of it is because of this fake theology. Well, they're mixed up theology, or the theology of non-resistance, the theology of pacifism, the theology of just obeying government and allowing that tyranny, those lies, that deception to take and propagate to the point where people's minds are numbed to nothing. So with that, we have to take a hard look at, well, what do we do? And as we take and we look at, once again, putting up the chart for you of the work of, let's see, let me slide back up here. There it is. The chart's in front of you of Dr. Ryan McPherson. You have the 4 levels of injustice. Level 1, not excessively atrocious governor. Then you got the lawless tyrant, the coercive tyrant, and then the persecutor of God. And where that's all at right now, and how it was adapted not just from the Magdeburg Confession, but what our founding fathers did with it, was to look and say, no, you have to resist the evils. You have to resist everything, especially we're in DEFCON 4 in this chart. We're at that place where religion, our Christianity in particular, has been under attack. Now, Wednesday night, I asked a question to a number of folks there as to, how many people's churches were open. And there were a good number of people that raised their hands and said, our church is open. We're not following the mask thing. Um, we understand what it means to have liberty. But hey, you were at a meeting of people that understand liberty. So you would think that, oh, yeah, they go to a church that has some semblance of that. But yet I had one of our good friends who we had on the program before, and that's the person I'm trying to get on the program for next week if I can. His pastor is putting up fits about all of this and the Magdeburg Confession and standing up and resisting tyranny. And it's a reformed congregation, a reformed congregation. So if we had the likes of Jonathan Mayhew, and we had the likes of Pastor Cotton, and we had the likes of Todd, we had the likes of all of these others who were American Reformed pastors that said we had to resist tyranny, trying to apply that today is extremely difficult because, again, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have the pulpits that understand that. And worse, worse, you've heard me say this before many a time, worse is to get the unanimity of the people to understand to resist tyranny. The educational system has destroyed the ideas of self-governance and liberty, and everybody's supposed to just follow along with government. So that's why you see what? All of these kids being abused, child abuse, massive child abuse, by making them wear muzzles. They're muzzled. It's not about protecting kids or you being protected from a kid. It's about muzzling the kid, mentally injuring the children, because children need to smile and see the smiling faces of others. They need to be interacting and not going out into the playground wearing a muzzle at 6-foot separation and not being able to talk or interact. That is systematic, institutionalized child abuse. And why are parents up in arms about it? That is what you can do right now in modern America to resist tyranny, is to unmuzzle your children and tell your schools to unmuzzle your children and tell the teachers union to get out of our schools. Parents should be storming, and I mean this. This is your right to resist. Parents should be storming their school districts and pounding on the front door of the house of the board members of the school districts, and especially the superintendent of schools, and tell them to set your children free. And if the teachers can't handle it, tell them to leave. Because the teachers union is destroying your children. You're mentally abusing your children. You're destroying the next generation. You want to do something? Get off your duff, grandma, grandpa, and go save your grandchildren. You want to do something, mom and dad? Instead of sitting there and shaking in fear, where am I going to get when am I going to get my vaccine? The vaccine doesn't work. Come on, they're always saying you where to get the vaccine, you got to get a mask. No, go save your children. Because you know what? They're just turning into little yellow people, some with glasses, some with face masks, all wearing the same color coveralls. Yes, your children are being turned into minions. They're being turned into minions. Anyway, I got on my high horse, but you have a right to resist. You absolutely have a right to resist, and if you want somewhere to resist, that's a good starting point. That's a good starting point. Sam Adams, he was all for education and public education in particular, but not in a way that it would destroy children, but in a way that it would lift up a whole nation. Come on back.